Yeah, let's see the types of instruments. Our aim is to define an instrument and classify the instruments. So let's get started. And types of instruments are we find various types of instruments in the industry. First of all, let us know what is instrument. Instrument is a device or a mechanism used to determine the present value of the quantity under measurement. So whatever the quantity you are going to measure, so the device which helps us to measure that quantity is an instrument. And let us see, I have a simple resistor network with a R2 and R1 values with a voltage applied 10 volts. If I want to get the voltage across this resistor, I want to know how much voltage is there at this resistor. I can connect a voltmeter to this. I am sure that theoretical calculations, if I do, I will get a 5 volts here in a theoretical calculations. So if I connect the voltmeter, I can measure the accurate value and it will shown in the meter. So the value can be displayed in a different ways. So it can show in a digits like this. So if the voltmeter showing like this, these type of meters we call it as a digital instruments. Okay, they display the values directly in digits or discrete values they will show. And if the instrument is showing an indication like this, so it will show the continuous values and show and rest at a particular position of the value. So these instruments are called as a analog instruments. Their scale is there. When you apply a particular voltage, this scale is going to move from 0 to some voltage and it will show the value. Hence it contains all sorts of value. So that's why it is called as an analog instruments, which is having a continuous values on the scale. So apart from these two classifications, we can do many classifications. So what is measurement? Type of measurements. So let us take a boy is measured by his father, his height. So he can measure using a standard device like a scale and see how many meters tall this boy is. So the standard acceptance measurement can be used to measure the unknown height. The height of the boy we don't know. So we can use a known parameter and compare it with the height, and we will calculate the height in terms of known values. So this type of thing we call it as a measurement, or in a definition, the process of determining the amount, degree or capacity of a measured quantity by comparison, as we done here, with a accepted standard system units like the scale being used. So the process of determining how much amount the measured value is or how much capacity the measured value is, that's it. So we have different ways of doing it. You can directly measure the value by comparing the unknown quantity with a known standard quantity. So that's called direct method of measurement. So the devices which do this operation, we call them as a secondary instruments. And the indirect method of measuring, so the unknown quantity directly measured in a device, so that type of is there, we call it as a indirect method. So these instruments are absolute instruments, we are directly measuring the unknown quantity. So absolute instruments or primary instruments. Absolute instruments are the instruments which gives the value and magnitude of the quantity being measured in terms of physical constants of a measuring instruments. Simple, I can say that these are the accurate instruments which gives in a standard constant values of an instrument. So they do not require comparison with any other standard instruments, because as I told you, these instruments are absolute instruments. So they determine the quantity directly in their instrument terms. So absolute instruments are not simple to use and they are very time consuming to compute the value. So if you want to measure any value using these instruments, it takes a lot of time to do that. So hence it is not used for practical purposes. Use it for the purpose making some standard measurements and calibrating secondary instruments. So we'll use these instruments as a reference to determine or to design the secondary instrument scale. So examples for the instrument is pendulum. So the pendulum will determine the time, and the tangent galvanometer, you can see this is a simple galvanometer. It is an absolute galvanometer which can be used for a low current measurement. So this will work on a principle of magnetism of a earth and also the magnetism that was produced inside the instruments. So these are standard devices. Absolutely they will measure accurate values, so they measure directly in amps. So we call it as these are the one example, and there are other meters, relay current meters, absolute electrometers, and Lorentz force methods. So these all are absolute instruments. Simple in nutshell, they measure the quantity in a constants or standard units. So secondary instruments are the instruments which is compared with the standard units. So the secondary instruments needs a calibration with respect to absolute instruments. So as I told you, these instruments, absolute instruments or standard instruments, they sets the standard value or unit. So using that value, you have to measure or calibrate the secondary instrument, and the secondary instrument determines the value of the quantity being measured from the deflection of the instrument. So these instruments will show the value in the deflection terms. So calibration must for